Welcome to the Tune Up. I am your host, Sarah Zuboff, and I feel a little bit like John Oliver, but I am so excited to have my own podcast and to get started talking to you about how we can optimize our wellness mentally, physically, and spiritually. And this week, we are going to talk about the difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack and the strategies that you can use to help function optimally, even if you have an anxiety or panic disorder. So let's get started. I wanted to start off, I was going to share my own experience with anxiety and panic because I have been diagnosed with both, but I thought actually it would be a little better if I gave a story that was recent in my own life, which essentially was last night. I was at a baseball game watching one of my sons, and it was very exciting. His team was behind. They were losing pretty significantly, and it was the last inning, and his team was at bat, and the bases were loaded. They had 2 outs, and I think you know where I'm probably going, but my son was up next. And the stress of that was intense. It doesn't matter how old you are or how much you love or hate baseball. I think anyone in that situation would feel pretty stressed out about being basically the last man standing between, utter crushing defeat and maybe coming back a little bit. And unfortunately, my son does struggle with panic and anxiety. He gets that from his mama. And so it was intense. And while, some people, they feel stressed and they feel squeezed by a situation, they're able to kind of, function and still perform, maybe not optimally, but they're still able to kind of function. Well, in this case, my son's panic was so acute, he essentially shut down. And, there were pretty intense tears. There was, he just kept kind of chanting over and over they were going to hate him because the expectation was he was going to strike out. And, my son's body was at the game, but his mind had left the field, right? Like he's all of a sudden in future land where he has determined that he has struck out, he has lost the game for everyone, and everyone hates him. So this is something that, I think a lot of our kids go through, and I think that adults go through, and we just don't talk about it enough because we're either embarrassed or we're afraid of how we might look, and it might kind of tarnish whatever image we're trying to project. But I share it because it was such a good example to me of how panic can utterly disrupt our lives. And the trigger can be seemingly small. I mean, we're talking little league, we're talking, he's just now, the kids are just starting to pitch. So he's really early on in his kind of little league career even. But, the brain doesn't know that. And so I think that, as we're going about our day, seemingly small triggers can suddenly morph into huge problems for people that have these kind of mental challenges. And I think it's important to talk about because ultimately I think there's kind of a misconception that it's always going to be the big things. It's always going to be like the job interview or the test or the but essentially, and yes, I get the example that I shared was kind of extreme. The bases were loaded, they were 2 outs, like the circumstances were relatively high, but his brain heightened it into a life or death situation, which it obviously isn't. It's Little League Baseball. And even if he was a Major League Baseball person, still not life or death. But our brain doesn't know the difference. Our brain, when it's triggered like that, is just sending up the bat signal like, beep, beep, we need some help here, dude. We need the superheroes to circle because the world is about to end. That's what our brain is doing. And, we need the strategies to still function. Otherwise, we are going to wait for, mythical Batman to come save us, right? So before I get into the strategies, because I do have some really good strategies that help myself, help my son, deal with these kind of situations. But before I get into that, I do want to touch on the difference between an anxiety attack and a panic attack. Because I know for me, I tend to use them interchangeably because I do suffer from both. And I, sometimes I'm not as careful with my words, and I just kind of say one or the other, and I really mean, them interchangeably, but they really are slightly different. A panic attack, and I go into this, I know it gets kind of in the weeds with the definitions, but I do think knowledge is power. And I also think it's important for us with littles who are struggling with these kind of mental emotions and these heightened emotions, especially now. The anxiety is at an all-time high with our kiddos. And so I think the more that we can articulate it and give them the vocabulary of what they're feeling, ultimately I think it will help them in the long run. So I do think it's important to go into. So I'm going to go into it now. That was my little disclaimer. But basically, a panic attack is it comes on more suddenly, and it involves an intense and often overwhelming sense of fear, right? So that's when your brain is like, whoop, whoop, the world is ending, the world is ending. And that kind of signaling from our brain was super, super, super important back in the day when we were physically at risk more often than we are now. Now, obviously, panic and anxiety, it has its place. Like our brain, we need those early warning systems for sure, because, it still can be pretty dangerous when you're driving your car and there's a lot of traffic and you have to slam on your brakes. Like we need our brain to function and identify danger. But the thing is, with people who suffer from panic and anxiety, it's almost like our brain is a little too finely tuned. I actually, when I first realized that I was experiencing these things, I looked at it as a detriment, but ultimately I look like it's kind of a superpower. Like I am so finely tuned to what could possibly be a problem or a dangerous situation. And I mean, I'm like the master of self-preservation, right? So when you look at it that way, it's kind of like, oh, okay, I'm going to survive this shit, right? So it looks like it's kind of it can be a good thing, especially if you make friends with and learn how to take care of these feelings. But essentially, it's sudden, it's intense, it's definitely fear-based, and usually it has pretty challenging physical symptoms. I experience racing heart rate. Sometimes I'll feel like a shortness of breath. I'll feel like I'm hyperventilating. And in my severe cases, I feel like I'm going to throw up, like definitely nausea. And what sucks about them is sometimes they happen without cause, right? So you won't have that trigger. My son definitely had a trigger with his baseball game, but I suffered a pretty traumatic physical injury almost 3 years ago. And since then, I wake up about 2 to 3 times per week with a panic attack. I'll just wake up. And so there is no obvious trigger. It's just something with my brain that it's like, again, it's a little too tuned. My bat signal is kind of it's kind of wonky. It's going off at all times. And I have to kind of deal with it. Right. Now anxiety panic attacks are usually cued by external stressors. Sometimes not, but usually we can kind of like, oh, this is a trigger. But anxiety is more like worry or distress. And it's usually related to the anticipation of a stressful situation or experience. So that thinking about your upcoming job interview would be more anxiety, right? Panic is more you get to the job interview and you realize that you have forgotten your resume, your phone, and everything you needed to show up best face forward at home, and you don't have it. That would cue a panic attack, right? So when someone's having an anxiety attack, those things, it still can feel just as crappy, but it's usually anticipatory. It's not usually in the event itself. It's more like, oh, I'm freaking out over having to bake my sister's wedding cake, and I've never had to do that before, and it's causing me so much stress, right? Now, they can feel really freaking similar. And the bummer is you can have anxiety and a panic attack at the same freaking time. I mean, how horrible is that? But it's true. You can. I look at it, I mean, I said it was horrible, but I look at it again. I'm just like, that's how much of a high achiever I am, is I don't just have anxiety. I don't just have panic. I have them both. And sometimes, damn it, I have them at the same time. But here's some of the symptoms. So an anxiety attack, yes, it's more apprehension, worry, distress, restlessness. Now they both, panic and anxiety, will have fear. Panic, the fear it's like that fear of dying or losing control. And, or in my son's case, it wasn't fear of dying. It was fear of people not liking him anymore because he was worried he was going to make a mistake. And make no mistake, that fear of losing your community, that fear of losing your connection to the people that you value is sometimes just as intense as that fear of like physical harm. It's to me, that sense of losing your community can be just as horrifying, right? Now the physical kind of symptoms are similar on both sides. You get heart palpitations, chest pain, shortness of breath, tightness in your throat, dry mouth, but then sweating. That's always nice when you feel like you don't have enough moisture in your mouth, but then your body is like producing copious amounts of sweat. I love that. You might get the chills or hot flashes, or if you're like me, you're perimenopausal and you're like, am I having an anxiety attack or am I just having hot flash or, whatever. Trembling, shaking, numbness, tingling, nausea, headache, and feeling faint or dizzy, as if that wasn't enough. So yeah, they're both pretty awful. And again, sometimes you can have them at the same time, which is always fun. You're like, just call yourself a high achiever and call it a day. But the good news is there are strategies for still performing and performing optimally. I talk to a lot of people about anxiety and panic. I'm pretty open about it now. And one of the things that I think sets me apart from some of the folks that I talk to is I refuse to let anxiety or panic stop me from succeeding. So I take it along for the ride with me, and I have, through the years have had to create a toolbox of tools. This is why I call my podcast The Tune Up, to kind of tune up my emotional regulation, because sometimes it's a little wonky. My bat signal is signaling when there's no danger ahead. So I have had to create a whole toolbox worth of tools that I can use so that I can still succeed at work, so that I can still be the mother that shows up at her kid's baseball game and isn't so fatigued because she has insomnia from her chronic anxiety. Or, I'm still able to give those presentations at work and present and be a face of my company, even though I have a real fear of public speaking, or I have some social awkwardness in groups of over, 2 or 3 people. And I'm talking, I still have awkwardness even over Zoom. I still have trouble getting kind of in my head and worried about that. So, in spite of that, I'm still able to succeed, and I am determined to, and I'm determined to find tools that work for me, that work for my kids, because I want to set them up to succeed and feel like they are fully actualized and powerful and empowered human beings. And so that's why I started this podcast, so that I can help other folks perform optimally in the face of these kind of we're going to talk mental challenges today. We'll talk about physical challenges at another time, because I also, I do believe health and wellness it's not just your physical body. It's not just your mental health. It's all of it, right? We need to learn how to take care of all of us as full human beings, as the whole package. Okay, so that's enough of me rambling. Let's get into the strategies. So one of the first things I do for myself, it doesn't work as well with my kids because of the ages they are. They're not teens yet. And so you have to keep that in mind when you're talking with kids under the age. I'm sure this is even true for teenagers. I don't have teenagers yet, but the truth is they don't have the vocabulary yet to really articulate what they're going through. So a lot of it, when you're trying to give them a talk about what they're feeling, you are going to either have to give directed questions like, are you feeling scared? Are you feeling angry? Okay, you're angry. What's underneath that? Are you really afraid of something happening, or are you angry that something might happen? And so you really have to direct that conversation versus asking, what's wrong? What are you feeling? What's happening? Because they just don't have the words, right? Their brains have not made those connections yet. So we need to provide that dialogue. Now, when you're doing it for yourself, I like to sometimes reverse engineer what my worst thought is, right? So when I'm panicking, typically I'm not afraid for my life, but I'm afraid of something going wrong. So, for example, let's say that I had a panic attack the other day. I was going into a meeting. I had to present. I didn't feel like I was as prepared as I should have been. So my mind automatically went to, I was going to be fired, right? That was my end result. I hadn't even given the presentation yet. And, my boss wasn't even there for the presentation. So it really had, I just wasn't in reality, right? I was living in some far off land. Called that I'm going to be fired, right? So when I reverse engineer it, the first thing I do, okay, if I were fired, what would happen? And it's like, oh, if I were fired, well, I'd have to get my resume together, look for a new job, apply for unemployment, talk to my husband. I am lucky enough that we're a 2-income household. So it wouldn't be great for me to be fired, but it also wouldn't be the end of the world. So what my brain was telling me is like, woo, woo, end of world approaching. But when I looked at it realistically, I was like, oh, it would suck, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. And I was able to calm myself down. Now, that doesn't always work, right? Because our brains can be really freaking persuasive that it is the freaking end of the world, right? And you have all this proof. Your body's sweating, your mind is racing, your stomach's hurting. You have all these other things to deal with too. It's not always possible to be rational. So I'm going to give my third tool is going to help when the kind of talking points don't help, the kind of talking strategies don't help, because my second strategy is also talking. It's kind of a pep talk. I call it a pep talk, but basically what it is I like to bring myself back into the room. Because like I said, you're not in the room typically. You are worried about, you're futurizing, you're catastrophizing. And if reverse engineering I don't think will work, or it hasn't worked, I will give myself what I call a pep talk, which essentially is bringing myself back into the room. So I shared that I wake up with panic attacks about 2 to 3 times a week. Typically, these are fear for my body. Like I wake up just afraid I'm dying. And it stems from this traumatic injury that I had. And so one of the things I start with is, you're safe. You're in your bed. Your body is whole, your body is strong. That kind of steer gears towards like affirmations, which can be helpful. But essentially I try to remind myself that my body, my brain is telling me, oh my God, you're facing down a bear and he's about to eat you. But my body is actually in bed under the covers next to my husband and my dog. We are safe. We are fine. My brain's just flipping out, right? And sometimes that helps. The other thing is to get yourself back into the room is connect to your senses. So list something you see, list something that you hear, list something that you taste, list something that you touch. I'm touching the desk. I'm hearing a bird outside. I taste my morning coffee on my tongue. Just kind of go through the 5 senses to, again, bring yourself in the room and to stop your brain from going off to hell land, right? I was going to say la la land, but that sounds lovely. Where your brain is going is actually pretty shitty. So we're going to call it hell land or Hellsville. We want to come back from there. That was a ticket. You need to get a refund. Okay. So, give yourself a pep talk. Connect to your senses. Now, if those things don't work and you're still feeling yucky, my third strategy I learned from another podcast, which I highly recommend. I think it's called Huberman Labs, but his name is Dr. Huberman, and he is a neuroscientist. And if you listen to his podcast, he's going to go into the science of why this strategy works better than I can. So I'm not going to, because I'm not a scientist. But he is a scientist that he's bringing us the like cutting edge stuff that work for anxiety and for the different things that he talks about on his podcast. For us, for my audience here, you and I have road tested some of his strategies. So I can tell you for sure that it works for me, and this strategy also works for my son. And it is a double inhalation followed by an extended exhalation. So it's kind of I think of it as like a drama sigh, right? Like I'm a theater person. And it just reminds me of like a super dramatic like sigh that some girl would think up as like to show her parents that she's pissed off or she just thinks they are the worst. But the good news is it is really freaking helpful for reducing the physiological symptoms of anxiety, but it also triggers the brain to start calming itself down. And this strategy I used with my son yesterday at his game, and he did 2 rounds of it, and he was able to calm down in less than 5 minutes and go back to participating in his game and having fun doing so, which is a huge, huge win. And for parents who have kids who struggle with these issues, you know what I'm talking about. To get them back on the field and to get them playing full out and smiling and jumping within moments after one of these panic attacks, it's a miracle. It's a lifesaver. So it's a double inhale with an extended exhale. You do 3 rounds of it and then you breathe normally. Typically, I will do 6 breaths in total if my panic is pretty acute and I'm having trouble calming down. So I'll do 3, breathe normally for a few breaths, and then do another 3. So I'm going to demonstrate it now. It's inhale twice, exhale. 1 more. And then I just breathe normally. And then I kind of assess, like, okay, how am I feeling? I'm still feeling pretty stressed out. And then I'll do another round of it. And I kid you not, within moments, I have calmed myself down. And it works for my son's I've used it with both of them. And like I said, it has been such a flippin' life changer. So I love that. Now, I am going to say I'm not a doctor. I cannot advise you, I don't think ethically, to try this breath. I don't know what health issues you may have. So I would check with your doctor before you do any sort of breathing techniques, because I know that it can be dangerous for some people with heart issues or lung issues. So if you have one of those, talk to your doctor and say, hey, I heard about breathing techniques to help calm my panic and anxiety. Am I a candidate for that? Can I do that safely? And run it by your doctor and see what they say. But otherwise, give it a try. Let me know how it works for you. I myself think it's a total game changer, and it really is something that I pull out and use quite often when I'm dealing with panic and or anxiety. And as you know, I'm a high achiever. I like to do them at the same time. And so because of that, I need a really effective technique to calm those feelings and still perform optimally. But that's all I've got for you today. I am super stoked that you joined me here. I hope that this was helpful, and I'd love to hear about your experience. If you have tried this breathing technique or you are going to try it, let me know how it worked for you, because I want to know. And if you have other breathing techniques that you know of that you use, or you have other kind of pep talky techniques or reverse engineering techniques, whatever. I would love to hear what you guys are using to help deal with these feelings and how you're dealing with them with your kiddos, because I think it's important that we talk about these issues and that we share these strategies. I don't think that we do that enough. So anyway, next week I will have another health and wellness topic for you, and I look forward to you joining me there. All right, bye.